first few days as the facilitator. In other words, to make it easy for people to work, so make sure that the horn players had water to drink, and if there was a song that was particularly hard on the trumpet players, to make sure they had a break between them. And then the other side of it was the motivator, to get people in there to work and make sure the next set of drums was in there and ready to go on time. And if the horn players were taking a break, to make sure they were back, and then to round them all up before. So it was very different, of course, working with 15 people. That and in the context of Rush too, it's more like a cottage industry collective where there are only 3 of us and we're all there doing our parts of it. So I'm not used to taking on the leadership role of being a leader of men. So that was something that I had to adapt myself to, recognizing that the job required that, and that's what I would have to do. So that was a bit of a jump for me, just temperamentally, because I'm not used to being that way. But at the same time, it's what the job required, so I had to learn.
Was that the biggest difference between working on this and then working with Rush, was really the organizational part of it? Were there other technical or other parts of it that were very new to you?
It was very completely different, really, from working on a Rush album. First of all, the material was already written. All the arrangements were written, and they pre-existed, so there was some guideline of how things should be done. And plus there was the revolving door of drummers coming in and out, and such a large number of people as musicians involved in it. And the other difference, of course, that it was happening so fast. Because all of that was done, there was no need to be exploring or experimenting, in the sense that when we make a Rush record, nothing is a given. So we start from a couple of little ideas and build on them and build on them, and then you take time to explore little tangents of, well, let's try this. Okay, that didn't work, let's try something else creatively. All of that side of it has to go on through the process of making a Rush record, so there is a lot of time spent on that and a lot of time spent on the details, because you have to find every solution, where on this record the solutions were very much given. Like I said, the music already existed, so there was no need to worry about that. The only thing that was necessary was to get a good performance of it. But at the same time, that moved very rapidly, and the whole thing was virtually recorded live. There were no overdubs. There was very little chance to repair any little mistakes in that. And each song was played on the average perhaps 3 times. So after 3 takes, you'd move on to another song and then move on to another drummer. And things were going so quickly that I would feel dizzy by the end of the day, because the focus on each element had to be so total. Each song that we were recording became my total focus of existence. So I'd be walking home from the studio at the end of the day, having recorded maybe 5 complete songs with 2 different drummers, and all the chaos and all the organizational difficulties. And technically or technologically, we were pushing the recording equipment to the max to be able to do this live off the floor over and over again, and to have everybody's headphones be right and all that stuff. So the stress level was extremely high, but so was the satisfaction level. And I'd be walking home from the studio the night just dizzy, trying to remember, what did we do? What songs did we record this morning? What drummer was in this morning? I could only remember the most recent piece of work that we'd done. But at the same time, by the following morning, I'd be walking into the studio, just walking on air, so excited about what was going to be happening today. So it was a very magical 2 weeks, I think, for everybody involved. And everyone did have the sense that magical things were being created very rapidly, and also that there was a sense of history too, with some of the people that were coming in and out to work on it, some of this music that was being dusted off and refreshed. Because all the original sheet music for these tunes, some of them looked like Egyptian papyrus, all worn and roach-eaten and food spilled on them, and generations of musicians had scrawled their little notes on it. So often in the charts you would see, "Watch Buddy," because he was the band leader, and Buddy didn't read music, so there was no sheet music for him. And if there was a drum break, he would just play, and then he would count the band in. So all these little things, whenever there was a drum break, "Watch Buddy" was written right on the chart.
Is there a particular, you mentioned all the stories that were coming through during the breaks, is there a particular Buddy story that was most fascinating or interesting, sticks in your mind?
Really, there are no specific ones, just because there were so many. I mean, every time somebody told a story, that you'd hear, "Wait, I've got a better one," and somebody would come out with it, and there are a lot of outrageous temper tantrum stories, but then at the end of it, people would be saying, but what a sweetheart he was. It was very obvious that everyone associated with the man truly loved him and missed him deeply, regardless of how outrageous these stories and how abrasive his behavior might have been sometimes. It was very patent that beneath all this was an excellent person, And if he got short-tempered about things, it was nearly always about the music, which is the thing that he cared about the most. So if people weren't playing as well as he thought they should, he would get mad, because he was driving himself so hard all his life that he couldn't accept less from anyone else.
So that was sort of like the recurrent theme that kept coming up.
The stories go so far. I mean, he was always a stickler about the way the band dressed and so on and how they looked. So they would always have a series of matching outfits, and the musicians in the band always had stories about these Romanian suits, you know, that would be coming apart during the show. The sax player would have his jacket taped together at the back all through the show because it had come too small. And there's one story of Buddy always wore whatever he wanted, and then the rest of the band was dressed to match. So they were all walking toward the bandstand one night before the show, and the rest of the band goes through, and then Buddy's coming up with just, you know, a white sweater on or something, and the security guard stops him and says, "Excuse me, sir, are you with the band?" Buddy says, "Buddy, I am the band."
Aside from matching the stylistic parameters you would set down for yourself, what was it specifically about Cottontail that made you want to play it?
The thing about Cottontail, the most appealing, partly it was a Duke Ellington composition, and I consider Duke Ellington to be the great genius of American music, so in a way it was a chance for me to pay tribute to him as well. But also it was a very traditional arrangement, but extremely detailed, and required a lot of technical rehearsal and preparation to get it all right and to learn it all, and to all the little horn shots and accents throughout the course of it, and all the syncopated parts have to be so accurate with the rest of the horn players. So in that sense it was a large challenge and definitely a huge stylistic leap from what I'm used to. So that was I think part of the appeal of that one. And also I just really like it. It's very exciting the way the arrangement is constructed, and the tension and release of it, and the climax of it and so on just made it an exciting piece of music for me.
Any similarities in the way you would approach that song to anything that Rush would have written a song in the studio that maybe was technically demanding as well? I mean, was there any similarities in the approaches between the two?
Only in the intensity of application and concentration that it took to do it. But the thing is, with Rush tunes, we were working in a vacuum. You know, there's no guide in which direction to go, so consequently that gives you a lot of freedom, but at the same time freedom can be a scary thing because you have to make decisions within that chaos and decide which direction you're going to do it. The difference with this music is that it is already written and it is already arranged, and there is a definitive version of it already recorded with Buddy Rich playing it, so that applies certain parameters and certain limitations to how it's going to be done. But as I said, in some ways it makes it less difficult because when it's not necessarily a creative piece of work, but rather an interpretive piece of work, I think that is necessarily a lot easier to do, the same as it's a lot easier for an actor to speak lines that someone else has written than to sit down and write those lines.
What is it about Buddy's playing that is so especially revered within the drum community?
It depends really on a musician's understanding of what Buddy did. You know, it's easy to focus on the spectacular drum solos and his dynamic visual presentation of them, born out of the showman days of Gene Krupa and his own background in vaudeville and so on. But when you really look deeply into it, you realize what an accomplished accompanist he was and how great he was at playing with the band. And even with his own band, you know, maybe he did a drum solo every night, but the rest of the performance was all him playing with the band, and that's certainly what he loved the most. And even deeper when you look at the work that he did with vocalists, he was excellent at that. You know, when you listen to him play behind Frank Sinatra or Mel Torme or Sammy Davis Jr., people with whom he recorded, he was just so good at being invisible behind vocal sections, and then when an ensemble section came in or an instrumental break, he would just drive the band to new heights and then again become totally invisible behind the soloist or totally invisible behind the vocalist. And certainly among the musicians that he worked with, those things were appreciated, but history tends to focus on the spectacular, so now he's remembered more for his abrasive personality and for his fireworks on the drum set than he is for his all-around musicality. Obviously, he couldn't have been at the forefront of drumming and jazz music for 50 years if he wasn't a master of each element of that.
So Buddy's determination just in life then probably dictated a lot about the way he played drums.
Well, yeah, one of the things that I most empathize with him as a person is he was totally uncompromising. You know, he did what he did, and yes, he chose to continue playing big band music all his life, but it never stayed the same. He had no patience at all with nostalgia, and he was growling always about people coming to his shows expecting a Tommy Dorsey revival or whatever. It was never what he was about. And also, it was sheerly the strength of his will that made it possible at all. I mean, just imagine in historical terms, musically, he chose to put his big band together in 1966, you know, when nothing could have been less in demand commercially, and he virtually willed that band through the next 20 years of keeping it live, keeping it working and keeping it alive, and playing high schools and universities and just whatever he could, and doing a tour of Europe every year and doing the Far East, and working an incredible amount. You know, as the years went by and he wasn't getting younger, he still continued to be excellent and a total master, and still never stopped, you know, right up basically until he was too sick to play anymore. He kept playing and kept touring, so that sheer force of will is the only thing that made it possible. No one gave him that band, no one gave him an audience by any means. You know, it was a real struggle for him all the way through, but he wouldn't compromise.
Yeah, I mean, had you let down and said, okay, I'll play the nostalgia bit, I mean, life would, I mean, it would have been much easier for him to probably make it around and get certain gigs, because, you know, there's the nostalgia market would have been the easy way to get
Mm-hmm.
it, I imagine. You look at Buddy's drum kit, and, you know, it's pretty spare. You know, there's not a hell of a lot that's he's surrounded by, but it's, I mean, does that speak to really, yeah, his talent, that he's able to make so much go on with, you know, just sort of the basics?
Well, because it is the classical drum set, there's usually a reason for that, and it is the fundamental vocabulary of drumming, and essentially it can be said that it is all you need. I mean, any drummer that I know started with that or less. I started with 3 drums, so to me it was a luxury to have 4, and through the live performance work that I've done in this kind of music and through the recording, I did just use a 4-piece kit because that was all that was required to play the music in the traditional manner. But at the same time, some of the drummers on this record did bring in more extensive drum kits and used more voices, and there's nothing wrong with that either, you know. There are no absolutes, and even from time to time, Buddy did add another couple of tom-toms or another China cymbal or something else to be interesting. It's just a function of what the music requires, really, and I think there's no reason in my mind why I couldn't now play this music using more drums and using more of a personal, you know, idiosyncratic approach, because the music does permit that. But because it was new to me and unfamiliar, I chose to approach it in a more familiar manner, and even to use Buddy's approach to it as my guide, because I've never played the music before, so I had to get a grounding in it and establish an understanding of it, and build a little confidence too, that I really had some idea of what I was doing. So I chose to play it that way up till this point, and I think in the future, if I were to pursue it again, I would put more of myself into it, use more voices in the drum set, and use more of my personal approach to it.
What was it like working with Kathy Rich on this project? What kind of meeting of the minds was it between the two of you?
Yeah, as I mentioned, Kathy has such a network of connections within the drumming community, and also she toured with her father so often and so much that she knows the music completely inside out, to the point where I'd see her in the studio kind of humming along with the second trombone part or something like that. So night after night of hearing the band play has given her such a knowledge of how it's made up. So from the beginning, she and I got together and, you know, exchanged lists of who we thought would be appropriate, and it was Kathy who put together the musicians for the band itself, and it was Kathy who contacted all the drummers and organized all that side of it. So she was very important to putting it together. I don't think it could have happened really without her.
Did she have a role in the music selection as well too, or she making suggestions about that?
Yeah, very much. As I mentioned, her knowledge of the music was of course much deeper than my own, and her husband Steve Arnold is also a fine drummer and very knowledgeable of the repertoire. So again, it was the two of them who tried to match drummers up with the right material and sent them tapes, you know, from which they could choose, and organize the sheet music and so on for the band. All of the archival side of it, and the, what I called in the credits, the artist and repertoire side of it in the true sense, was very much theirs.
Were there any of Buddy's old drums actually in the studio?
No, I brought in a poster and an 8x10 picture just to keep an eye on everybody, but no, we didn't have that.
Just 1 or 2 more, because we're gonna.
Oh, okay. I think that's.
Got everything?
Yeah.
I think you covered pretty much everything.
Yeah. Is there anything you would want to bring to light that we haven't touched on?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we're all set.
Did you just take one video still?
Mm.
Okay, great.
Video still. Sounds like an oxymoron.
Pull on a little bit. Great. Perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
All right.
Right, okay,
No.
that's,